Hey everybody, Tyler with Meeple Mountain, bringing you another board game review. This time from our friends at iv.studio here in Nashville, who've given us an advanced copy of their new set of expansions for Veiled Fate coming out, the Veiled Fate expansion box. This contains some additional content for the base game, some updates, some new reference sheets, things like that, but it really contains 3 new modules of expansions that can be added in together, simultaneously, one at a time, whatever you want to do. They add additional depth, strategy, and value to this game, bringing it all the way up to a 9-player game. That's right, this game plays 2 to 9 players now, which is crazy. This game has incredible depth, and I'm super excited to show you everything that the expansion box adds to Veiled Fate. Now, it's worth mentioning that this is not a Veiled Fate review, so I'm going to do some very light coverage on that when we jump in. We're really just going to focus on the new modules, what they add to the game, and the new depths and strategies that you can expect to find when you get this added to your table. So I'm excited for it. I hope it gets you hyped for it as well. But let's get to the table and learn everything we can about the new expansion box for Veiled Fate. Here is everything you can expect to find in the new expansion content box from iv.studio for Veiled Fate. Now, before we jump in, you'll remember that Veiled Fate is a game where you take on the role of a god who has secretly sired a demigod amongst the mortals, and you want great things for them. You desire success for them, whether you're just because you're a good parent or you believe it will bring you glory. You want your child to do well in the mortal realm. And so you're secretly dealt a demigod card at the start of the game to represent your offspring, and you work throughout 3 ages, sending them on quests, them and others, trying to get them the most glory so that they come out on top. In the core game of Veiled Fate, this is it. You're going to use cards to vote feathers or scorpions to make quests succeed or fail, depending on your secret agenda and goals and how you're trying to keep others down and get ahead yourself. But now with the expansion modules, there's a lot more strategy to it. There are reasons you may not want to gain the most points. There are reasons you may want others to gain points. There are different play styles, different strategies. Now there's adventures that you can even send your demi or fellow demis on and see how those turn out. There's lots of new things to explore here. There's 3 key core modules here. We have the Celestials, the Hadria, and the Servants expansions, and we have just some quality of life pieces that I think breathe a fresh and exciting aspect into the game. And we're going to look at all of those. And we'll start with the quality of life content first, and we'll work our way around to the biggest bite, which I believe is the Celestials here on the bottom. And we'll take a look at each of those and talk about how they add content and strategy and excitement to an already amazing game. Now keep in mind that any of these are kind of, they're a la carte. You can play with all of those. You could play this entire game with everything you see here, or you could plug in one piece of this until you find kind of that fit and that mix that works for you. Having that power of options and strategy I think is super valuable and helpful, and I'm really excited to show you everything that's in this box. So with that said, let's jump in and first check out the quality of life additional content we have on the top left. Here we have a look at all of what I am calling, at least, the quality of life content that can be added to your game as an expansion to Veiled Fate. So here we have your new God reference cards. These are just really nice, helpful things to have. Each one is double-sided, and there's enough for every player, and you get a list of all the gods, their types. So remember, you have bull, cheetah, and owl style gods, the 3 of each, the colors associated with them. We also have the god powers on the back-hand side that tells you how many fate cards you need to do the particular power and what those powers do. None of this is necessarily new, but is very helpful to have just as a quick and handy reference for each and every player. We also have these really fun foil cards for the gods. These can be replace your current one, so you have nice, new, fresh, crisp cards for each of the demis that would be given to you. The 2 new pieces that I think are great to talk about is what I like to call, and iv.studio lovingly calls, the spicy fate cards. These are additional cards that you can add to your fate card deck. They play just like normal fate cards, but have additional fun and exciting elements that I think continue to push that player engagement and interaction aspect that makes Veiled Fate such a great game. On the right, these 2 are pretty straightforward. It's 1 or 2 of your scorpions or feathers, but when it's revealed, the active player chooses scorpions or feathers. So if it's my turn, I'm the active player on the quest, I resolve the quest, I flip these out, I actually get to pick these items. So there's a little bit more fate and trust involved there. If I trust that the active player has my best interests at heart, I may play these cards. They're definitely a little bit of a risk-reward situation. The other 3 are more of those kind of, we'll call them specialty fate cards, and I'll just read what they do. They're all very interesting and add, again, those really cool interactions that can turn quests on their head. First is resolve the opposite side of the first slot, so your flipping how things would resolve, which is very tricky, super sneaky, great card. Next is discard remaining fate cards. So if this is the first card that came up, everything else is gone. So depending on when this comes up, you can have very different outcomes for your fate card draw. And then finally, you have active player chooses a player to add a fate card face up. Now, what's interesting about this particular card is that you notice it's going to make a player put that card face up. So it's a good way to gain information about the table, and I just love what these add to the strategy, the betrayal, and the craziness that can come up when you're on quests in Veiled Fate. The last section, speaking of quests, are adventures. These are, we'll call them quest replacements. So based on the number of players that you have, there may be gaps or open spaces at the table, right? Depending on the age that you're in, how many ages you're playing, player count, all those good things. These allow you to fill those spots of the table with something that doesn't really impact time on the table that much, but really creates and allows for really interesting interactions. So each of these adventures are a single demi action where they will go. Usually something happens the moment that demi is sent there, whether it's a coin toss for something or just a permanent gain or loss of a point. Then there will be a single card vote. For the most part, some of these have more, some of these have less, and then something will happen based on the outcome. A lot of times these can be coin tosses for crazy things. Sometimes they'll just be very strict gains or losses for a particular demi. But what's interesting about these items is, say I went here, I would do a coin toss right away. I would put my card in, and I would choose one other player to put their card in as well. What's nice about this is I know what card I've placed. These are a great way to have a very strong control over what's happening to a particular demi at the table, but it's also a great way to get information out of the table again, because if I have my opponent, Tom, we'll call him, play a card as well, I know exactly what Tom has played. No one else at the table knows 100%. It's info for them, but it's really great info for me if they're being honest or not based on what card they played. I can start to ascertain ideas about what's going on because, like, for instance here, this is a huge swing of no points, which just means they lost a point, or gaining them 2 net points. That's a huge swing. So you can kind of force people to be honest a little bit about their intentions. All of these pieces are very easy to plug into your current game of Veiled Fate. They don't take a lot of work or explanation. They're just nice additions and I believe, again, add quality of life to the game. Let's now transition and look at the 3 big modules of expansions that are new content and certainly change the way that you play and experience a game of Veiled Fate. Here we have the Servants expansion module of expansion content for Veiled Fate. This one is pretty straightforward and it adds 3 new minis to the game. We have Penance, Invictus, and Vesper. And they're going to transition and move around the board to various quests. And when they're on quests, they're going to have an effect. For instance, Penance has +2 to quests in this region for Scorpions. Vesper doing the same for Feather, so they're just slight edges leaning and pushing kind of towards a specific outcome. Invictus is the one who's crazy. He doubles all quest effects in the region that he's in. So if he is in a region, if you were going to gain 2 points, you now gain 4. If you were going to lose a point, you lose 2. All of those things get wild when Invictus is there. And so these allow you to kind of manipulate and push quests in a certain way or slow down the effects that another player may be trying to move for. Like if I know a player's trying to get feathers in an area, I may send Penance there to try and slow them in some way. But really, Invictus is what creates these incredibly swingy moments in the game, which can be hilarious and fun. And some people may not like it, but I really enjoy the swinginess and craziness that he brings to the table. And now you may think, well, man, just gaining 4 points always sounds good. Well, it used to in the core game, but now there's a reason that that may actually be a very, very terrible thing that's just happened to you. So with that in mind, let's take a look at the next expansion and talk about why having the most points may not be such a good thing. Now, you may be a little confused and say, well, Tyler, I thought you said this was going to be a big and impactful piece of the expansion content. Why am I looking at just a deck of cards and a little mini here? This doesn't seem very impactful. Let me tell you, this module changes the game dramatically. So here we have Hadria. Hadria is a little jerk who likes to live in the abyss, in the underworld, and then likes to come out and mess with the mortals and the demis alike. So this is the Hadria expansion content, and it adds an incredible feature and function to the game. It adds Hadria and her favor cards. The way that Hadria works, she actually has a tracker on the board, just like the demis do, that moves around and will gain or lose points in a very specific way, which we'll talk about in just a second. But Hadria actually follows demis around. So the first time that a god is smited into the abyss and moves out of the abyss to the pool or further on, Hadria actually follows that demi around. She latches onto them and moves with them. So say she moves to the city. Anytime a demi would move out of the city, she follows that first demi along as well, may follow them to quests or various places that they go, just tagging along, being a general nuisance. Now, the trick is, whenever a god is smited, Hadria is going to gain a point. She's going to move up on the points track, again, always at the front of the line of whatever track she's on, and just gaining points, just like the demis do. Whenever Hadria is at a location where a quest is successfully completed, not an adventure like we just saw a second ago, just a quest, she is actually going to go down in her points. She will lose a point, and she'll still be at the front of that line, but she'll lose a point. At the end of the game, what's going to happen, what's interesting about Hadria is any god, any demi that has more points than Hadria, because she's jealous and kind of a jerk, she's going to kill those demis, and they're gone. They cannot win the game. So if you had 12 points and Hadria had 10, well, you would normally win, but you don't in this case, and you actually would die. And the person who had 10 points or less, whoever had the most highest under Hadria, would win the game. That alone is a very, very impactful and interesting aspect of the game. I think this adds so much strategy and nuance to the game because you don't just rush points and try to get these runaway victory games. People can actually try to hurt you by using Hadria to your disadvantage. Say I'm way ahead. I have 10 points. Everyone else has 4 in the game. Well, the rest of the table is probably going to keep dragging Hadria to where quests are so that her points are low, so that even though I have 10 points, I'm just going to die at the end of the game. I have to find a way to lose points for my demi or smite a lot of gods so that I can actually get her tracker up so I have a chance of winning. There's just these really interesting choices that come up. This is such a great, great, great addition. And that would be enough, I think, for a great expansion. But there's a little bit more, which are these favor cards. So in the Abyss, these cards are going to come out in sets of 2. And whenever you move a demi from the Abyss up and pull them into the pool, you can claim one of these cards. And these cards replicate the god powers that you're familiar with within a game of Veiled Fate. And they have a number on them, which is called Corruption. It ranges from 0 to 3. On your turn, for free, as a not action, you can do one of these cards per turn and do this particular god power. But you have to keep the card in front of you. And whoever has the most corruption at the end of the game, corruption being the total number of those points, they're going to lose a point, which again sounds terrible, but could be the thing that actually keeps you safe from Hadria and actually would allow you to win the game. So there's some strategy for why you may not want to play a bunch of those cards. There is a reason that you may want to play a ton of them so that you can lose that renown and actually get in under the threshold of wherever Hadria is at on the map. And of course, having smite cards is always great because the more you smite, the higher her track gets. So there's some really fun and interesting interactions here. I believe that this is, in my opinion, an essential piece of the game that should always be played in every game of Veiled Fate moving forward. It was so much fun. I really enjoyed the addition of this content to the board. Now, this was a big one, but let me show you the final big module expansion that adds even more craziness to the game and changes the way that a player gets to play and actually interact entirely with a game of Veiled Fate. Here we have the big Celestials expansion module that allows 1 player per game of Veiled Fate, going up to that 9th player, to take on this really interesting role of one of these celestial deities with very different gameplay experiences and very potentially different win conditions. So I'll just kind of run through a high-level view of what each of these do, and we can talk about them a little bit more. So at the top you have, I guess, what you call maybe the more involved Celestials, is they all have additional cards or components that they use, and then some that just kind of play a little more normally but are still crazy. Let's start up here with the Steward. The Steward is quite complicated. At the start of the game, you're going to pick a win condition out of those cards, and it's basically groupings of demis within a range of victory points. You're kind of trying to keep things grouped together in specific ways. So for instance, the group of 4, I need all 4 of them on the exact same renown space. So I'm trying to kind of keep things clustered together in some way. Also, I can add this really specific plan, the Steward's Pain, as a quest to the board instead of my quest once per game, which is a very impactful and powerful thing that allows me to help with my groupings. So he's playing this very strange meta game where he's trying to group the demis together in certain ways. The sorcerer is actually not a celestial in the sense that he's not a god at all. He can't use god powers. He can use spells. He has his own tracker, his own mini. He can actually move around the board, join quests willy-nilly, and it doesn't matter what the restrictions are. He is actually trying to catch up with a demi that's his child that he's trying to reconnect with. And the way that he does that is by the end of the game, he wants to actually be on the same renown space as whatever demi is his. And he's just kind of along for the ride, trying to befriend his long-lost child, which is honestly pretty sweet. He also has his spell cards that he can play kind of in lieu of god powers that give him some really cool advantages and edges on the board. He's very interesting, very different gameplay, but very fun. The Prophet is actually kind of mean. We should call the Prophet the assassin here. But the Prophet is actually going to take 4 demi cards at the start of the game and is going to predict, of their own choosing, an age and a victory point ratio secretly on each of those cards. I'm going to keep them in front of them to kind of track what their predictions were. And if at any time in that age they get to that particular renown marker, whatever that threshold is that the Prophet predicted, that demi will die and will be removed from the game. That if it's a player's demi, they're gone, and they can't actually win with that particular demi. And if any time there's 2 demis killed, the Prophet would win the game automatically. Mother of All, I love Mother of All. She was very fun to play. She has these 3 very strong cards that are 3 of whatever they are, or her choice. So they're more powerful than any other fate card in the game directly. And those always come back to her hand, so she always has kind of access to these very, very strong fate cards. She actually wins at the end of the game if all of the players, the other players' demi characters, have higher scores than all of the non-player characters. So for instance, we played what would be called a 4-player game, and me, so 4 human players. So there were 4 demis that I needed to make sure their scores were higher than all of the non-player demis. And that was very fun to do, to try and navigate and try to manage the board state in that way. It was very chaotic, and I certainly enjoyed it. The Arbiter. The Arbiter is going to get 2 demis, and they are going to do very different things with those demis. At the end of the game, they win if they have 1 demi with the highest score and 1 demi with the lowest score. And so they're actually trying to kind of do the polar opposites of fate there in that sense. Iridan, he can do a god power for free every turn, which is kind of fun and nice, but he just observes. He just sits and observes and watches the world go by, and at the end of the game, he has to guess whose demi belongs to what player. And based on player count, if he gets a certain number of those correct, he wins the game automatically. The Tormentor is really interesting character as well. They have a once per game ability where they can swap a particular demi from the unused pile and add it to their deck. And at the end of the game, they win if the demi of the Tormentor is in last place. So they can actually try to basically stuff a demi into the lowest position on the board, and other players may try to pick up on that, try to get that demi some points, and at some point in the game they can actually switch to a new unused demi. But then if that demi, whatever it is in last place, they win the game. It's important to note that these win conditions kind of supersede the normal player win conditions. So, for instance, when I was playing Mother to All, the other players were actively trying to mess up my abilities. It seems nice, it seems friendly, like, oh, she's helping us get points, this is great, except it's not, because you actually don't want me to win, because if I win as Mother to All, I beat all of the other win conditions and supersede them, which means everybody else would lose. So there's some fun tension there as well with these Celestials being added in. The last thing to note is the favor of Hadria gives you corruption. Many of these Celestials can use those favor cards as well if they're able to qualify and grab those cards. For instance, as Mother to All, I was able to do that. But if you, as a Celestial, have the most corruption at the end of the game, you automatically lose and cannot win, instead of just losing a renown for your demi, because a lot of times you don't have a demi in that case. So that was a very interesting thing as well. Adding in the multiple expansions, it created some interesting tension and interaction that I really enjoyed. But this is the Celestials expansion, and again, I think that this is a very fun staple. It's better with higher player counts, of course, but I do think it adds a lot of interesting shenanigans and just kind of another layer of depth as you try to kind of interpret who everyone at the table is working for, working towards. While you know who is playing one of the Celestials, you're still trying to kind of be wary of them and unravel their motives and their plan and machinations within all of the other intrigue that you're trying to deduce. And this adds a nice layer of depth there as well. And that, in a nutshell, is everything that you need to know to have a really good time adding the expansion box content to your game of Veiled Fate. And it's important to remind you that everything there that you saw was modifiable. It was a module. You could play with one of it, with none of it, with all of it, whatever you want to do and you think adds depth and enjoyment to your game. I understand with the Servants expansion, there's some feedback that like it's a little swingy or can get crazy. I really think the Hadria expansion is just essential. I think it's so stinking good. And I think the Celestials add a lot of really fun depth and excitement. And of course, I think the other content is just quality of life stuff that should always be played in the game, but that's just my opinion. And these are things that you're free to discover and interact with and try with your game group and figure out what's the perfect addition and build for your game and your table. And I think that's what's great about the way iv.studio does most of their expansions. Even Moonrakers, for example, is the same way, where all of the expansions are modular and you can use them or not use them, and it's your choice. And that is a great option to have because it's just more replayability and more tailoring to your group and your preferences. And I think that's a super great way to do expansions. I hope it continues to catch on and sets almost a standard in the board game industry that expansions are almost always modular and optional in that way. Anyway, all that to say, I really enjoyed this. I got to play this with some friends and some new friends at Tennessee Game Days here recently, and it was just such a blast to get to the table and experience this game that I love in a whole new way with these new expansions. Again, Hadria just changes the game in such a positive way because it's not just a mad rush for points, it is a very tactical rush for points. And you have to think about how do you massage where Hadria's location is going to be and is, and get your guy kind of sliding in basically in second place right behind Hadria. How do I do that so that I can make sure I win? And then on top of that, maybe you're watching out for this Celestial who's helping you or not helping you and is in your way, and you're trying to kind of navigate for that too. And so there's just a lot of things that can get added to the game that make it really engaging, really adds just more tactical depth, and just again is such a fun social experience for a table of gamers to get together and do and have a great time with. It's easy to learn. The game is quite simple. The card play is still very light and simple, and the depth always comes from how are you reading your competition and how are you engaging with them to get the info that you need to come out on top. So all super positive things. Very, very excited for this. Love the work that Ivy's done to continue to improve Veiled Fate, and I think that you guys will too. So I'd encourage you to check this out when it launches on Kickstarter very soon. Be sure that you look to add it to your collection because I think it adds some content that you're really going to enjoy and going to just reinvigorate your love and passion for an awesome social deduction game. But I want to thank you guys so much for coming to Meeple Mountain. We always appreciate you guys giving us a view. I hope you'll continue to check us out. If you like what we're doing, please like and subscribe, hit the bell, let us know in the comments below other content that you guys would like to see. We make content because we like making content. We love board games, so we hope that you love the content and enjoy it too. I want to thank you guys again, and as always, happy gaming.
Thanks for checking out this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Check out these links to find some other games you might want to bring to the table. This is Tyler Williams, signing off.